Now that we've got our daily report, we might want to actually email that to somebody in the team to make sure that they're aware of all of the cases that were processed for that day. So to do this, we're going to have to create a new component for sending emails. We could just have an activity in the end process, but once again, that's not very robust. For example, if the list of recipients wasn't correct, or if the email addresses provided weren't good, or the attachment provided wasn't valid. We could just put the email activity in the end process itself, but it's much better to validate the inputs that are coming into that email activity, such as the recipients and the location of the file path. So once again, let's create a component and make sure that we're doing things properly. We'll take our component template, place it into a generic folder, and we're going to call this generic send email. Back into our project folder, open up our new component, and let's make our usual changes. You may have noticed I haven't been updating the comments. This is simply for the interest of time, but please do add comments to help those picking up your processes to understand what the process is doing. Okay, let's quickly check the arguments that we might be receiving. We're going to have a list of recipients, which will be provided in string format, so in recipients. We'll also have an in file path, but we can change this to in attachment file path. We won't have any arguments going out. What else? We're also likely to be expecting a username and password for the email account. So let's have an in username, change the direction to in, and we'll have an in password. Don't forget the notation. This time, this password is going to be secure string. So we'll change the type to a secure string. That's because we're going to get this credential from Orchestrator. So we have our automatic check to see whether the list of recipients is populated. We don't need to check the screen because this is a .NET type component that doesn't actually interact with any applications. Let's rename this because this is checking the recipients. And let's also check the username has been provided. Here we can see actually the exception message wasn't populated correctly. Need to update that here and in the previous check. Update the log message to something sensible. And don't forget to change the argument that it's referencing. Here we'll type list of recipients was empty. It's always good to have these log messages because even if the in str recipients argument is populated, for example, it's still good to know what it was populated with, whether the information provided was correct, and that'll help you to debug any errors if there was a problem sending the email. We're going to do a check on the attachment file, and finally we're going to have an activity to send the email. For our purposes, we're currently using Gmail, so we're going to use SMTP. If you're using Outlook, then of course use the send Outlook mail message. The properties are similar. Some of the port and server settings are different. So we're going to use our arguments here. So we're going to use in str recipients for the to. For the subject, we'll create a new argument because, again, we want to make this quite a generic component that can be used in multiple processes. The default value we'll put test subject. select our in subject argument, and do the same for the body of the message. You can put whatever message you want in there as the default value and use the newly created in-body argument for the body. Now, in order to attach the file, click on Attach Files, create a new argument, and for the value, we'll type in file path. Next up, we just need to update the port, server, and logon details to send this email on our behalf. If you're not sure what the Gmail SMTP settings are, you can go to Google and type in Gmail SMTP settings, and you'll be provided with a list of information. You may find that if your organization has two-factor authentication, you need to create and use the authentication key that will be provided by Gmail. For us, we're going to use port 587. If you're using this in a home or personal environment, and you just want to test access, you can change your settings to allow low security. So that will prevent Gmail from blocking your email being sent. The server name is smtp.gmail.com. This needs to be in quotes. And we're going to provide the email and password. So our email is going to be our in_str username. The username we're using is rpalicourse@gmail.com. Obviously, if you're using a different type of mail server, you'll want to enter your specific username and password details, SMTP and server settings. For the password, we won't provide that here. We'll look at that in the next episode where we set up some secure credentials. And finally, we're just going to enter a recipient for the email, which will be me. Next up, we'll set up those credentials and we'll give this component a run. So in order to test this workflow, one of the problems we have is that the password is held in a type of secure string. But if you look at the password property of the send SMTP mail message activity, you'll see that it's expecting a string. So what we want to do initially is create a new credential in Orchestrator. This will create a password type of secure string, which will pass through. Let's go to Assets within Orchestrator and create a new set of credentials. Let's call this Gmail credentials. It's going to be type of credential. Our username is going to be our email account. And here we can type our password securely. One thing to note is you can actually create different values for different robots. So for example, if you were running on different machines, you may have a Windows account or a specific password that needs to be used by that particular machine. Therefore, you can have one asset, but depending on which machine it's running on, you can send a different value for that asset. Okay, so for testing purposes, let's place a get credentials activity at the top of our component, and let's pull the asset that we just created. We called it Gmail credentials. We're going to store the username temporarily in our in username argument, and the password will be stored in the in password. Now we still have that problem where the password that's being passed is a secure string and the activity is expecting a string. So what we can do is just prior to sending the SMTP mail message, what we can do is we can use an assign to convert that secure string into a string. I can never remember how to do this, so each time I go and have a quick look on the UiPath forum. Quick search. You can see I've used it before, and my good friend Mihai Badita has a post here which shows us the text that's required for converting a secure string into a plain string. So we'll create a new variable called str Gmail password. And update the syntax to reference our secure password rather than the secure string variable that was previously there. In SS password, Should see the error message disappear. And now we have our, finally, we just need to make sure that the variable type is string, not generic value. And the error message will disappear. Now, this may seem like it's a little bit insecure. However, the important thing is not to log this password at any point during the process. And all we're doing is converting this in memory temporarily whilst we pass it into the SMTP mail message activity. So rather than using our in SS password argument, we're going to use our newly created string Gmail password. Great. So this now means that we can test this workflow independently without it being part of our framework. Once we add it into the framework, we'll get the credentials as using our get credentials workflow prior to running the generic send email component. So before you run this, make sure that you've already created a test.xlsx file or whichever attachment file path you created. Quickly looking at our logs, started the component, it tells us what the recipients list was, all of our information about the email, found the file successfully and sent the email. Hopefully, like I did, you've received an email to your email account saying test subject with an in-body of this is a test email from the LinkedIn bot. Okay, so now that we've created the generic send email component, we want to update it into our framework so that the work items that are processed and the daily report that is created is emailed to our required recipients. To do this, the best place to enter this information is in the end process. We don't want to put this in the finally section of the process transaction because that means the report would be created and emailed each time. Let's go into the end process and you can see that there's a sequence for end of process activities. We'll grab our generic send email component and import the arguments. Now we need to find a place to store all of the information that we need to pass into this component. First of all, we know that the attachment file is going to be in the daily reports folder that we've created, and we know what the name of it will be. So let's add some information into our config file, which is going to help us to populate these arguments. Let's open up the config file and start adding some settings that we're going to use in our dictionary. First of all, let's have daily reports folder. This is going to be the folder where the reports are saved. So C temp, daily reports. And let's update our argument. So this is going to be path.combine. And then we're going to reference the config file. So config, daily reports folder, dot string, then comma, because we're concatenating the file path, daily reports, underscore, and then use the plus sign to concatenate today's date, which is datetime and dot today, dot string, formatted as year, capital MMDD. Great. Next up are recipients. Let's do the same thing by adding some recipients into the config file. We'll call this email recipients. And let's add in my email address. If you want to add more recipients, you can simply separate them by commas. We'll initially leave the username and password because we're going to get those as credentials from Orchestrator. Let's have the email subject and the email body. Subject will be work items, daily report, and the email body will be please see attached the report from today's run of the work items process in the Acme application. Great. Let's go and reference each of these in the process. Firstly, the recipients, simple as simply config email recipients dot string. Same for the subject. Let's copy and paste, save time. Same for the body. Let's quickly check we've used the right text. Email body, email subject, email recipients. Great. And finally, let's enter the username and password, getting some credentials from Orchestrator. We've already created those credentials previously, and we've used them in the generic send email component at the start. We need to delete this, otherwise the credentials will be overwritten when the component starts. So delete and save. Go back into the main process, and remember that we have in our framework a get app credentials workflow. Import the arguments. This time we're going to be getting the Gmail credentials. Our username is going to be a new variable called str Gmail username. And our password is going to be a new variable called ss password. Finally, into the send email workflow, we need to update the username with our newly created str Gmail username. And we can pass in the secure string password of ss password. Great. Now, in order for us to test everything, we need to reset our work items, we need to reload the data, and then we need to run the main process again. And finally, don't forget, importantly, to add the extension. Okay. Hopefully, after you've run your robot, you'll get an email into your inbox that looks something very much like this, where you can see the subject is work items daily report, the attached message is our email body, and you get the daily report XLSX file included.